Get reaction to the passing of the late Andrew Mlangeni with former Member of Parliament and another ANC veteran, Dr. Essop Pahad. He's joining us by phone this afternoon. Doctor, a very good afternoon to you. I would imagine you, like many others, especially of your generation in the ANC, are feeling this loss today quite deeply.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me on your show. Yes, very, very deeply, Andrew was, I first met Andrew in the 50s, although he's 14 years older than I am. And I knew Andrew, got to know Andrew better when we were both members of Parliament in the post-94 Democratic Parliament. Now, it is, of course, always a great shock and a great tragedy when we lose somebody of the stature and status of Andrew Mlangeni. And my deepest sympathies goes out to his family and his organization, the African National Congress.
Mr. Pahad, you mentioned your time with Mr. Mlangeni in Parliament at the advent of our democracy, but when he was locked up with the likes of Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu in the Rivonia trial of the early 60s, what were the stories that you were hearing about him as an individual?
Well, as you know, there wasn't very much contact with the political prisoners on Robben Island, but we were in contact with Ahmed Kathrada, who was like my eldest brother. And from time to time, Kathy would say something about the other prisoners. But once some of the former prisoners who came into exile, such as Indres Naidu and them, then they spoke about Andrew and how wonderful Andrew was and the kind of discipline that Andrew displayed as a political prisoner on Robben Island.
And you and Mr. Mlangeni in 2016 were part of that group of about 100 or so ANC veterans who wrote a letter and convened along other forums basically asking the governing party to self-correct at the time. What did the ANC mean to him, especially at that time?
Well, unfortunately, during the time of the Zuma presidency of the ANC as well as the government, and certainly insofar as I'm concerned, following the Polokwane conference, the ANC degenerated into rather serious factionalism and even sectarianism. And corruption, which wasn't started in time. Corruption started in South Africa for centuries during colonial period. It was the most corrupt period in our history. Apartheid was the most corrupt society. But corruption began to be embedded within the movement itself and within the governing structures. And that, of course, caused a lot of consternation amongst many of us that the ANC was not dealing with some of these deep-seated problems in the movement. And, of course, we still remain concerned that the ANC needs to resolve all of these problems because we need the ANC to continue to be the governing party in South Africa.
Let me ask you this then, Mr. Pahad, because some of the ills that you mentioned still exist within the governing ANC. Do you think the party will be able to self-correct and reform, especially in honor of men such as Mr. Mlangeni, who basically gave their best years for this country and the party?
Of course, the departure of comrades like Andrew Mlangeni was the last surviving Rivonia trialists, makes it that much more difficult for us to work as hard as we can to get the ANC to change. And the ANC changes must come from within itself. It can't really come from the external side. And that means that when we talk about self-correction, we're talking about the fact that the ANC needs to, both the membership as well as its leadership from branch up to the NEC, needs to take stock of what are the fundamental problems that confront us today inside the ANC and how do we manage to overcome those problems. Because if we don't, I'm afraid the ANC can begin to lose the tremendous support that it still receives from the majority of our people.
Essop Pahad, ANC veteran, thank you so much for speaking to us on eNCA.